Hello, my name is Bob Plaschke, and for most of my adult life, I've had the privilege to spend time with and serve emergency responders. First response is an effort to get behind the badge and understand the kind of the highs and lows that emergency responders face and how they handle them. This podcast is sponsored by PepperBall, where I have the honor to serve as CEO. PepperBall makes a non-lethal alternative to guns that police use to keep them and the public they serve safe. My guest today is Chief Denny. Chief Denny is the chief of police of the Grand Island, Nebraska police force. Chief, welcome to the podcast. Appreciate you joining. You've been policing or in policing now for 30 years and a police chief for a great deal of that. Tell me, things must have changed a lot over the last 30 years. As you look back over your career, what are the two or three things that stand out that have changed for you since you started?
Well, thanks, Bob, for letting me be on your show. I really appreciate it, getting the word out as far as humanizing the badge and talking about policing. I would say one of the major things that has changed, the people and desire to get into policing and why. The why hasn't changed, but the scrutiny of policing has increased. The lack of desire to tolerate bad attitudes and bad apples in policing has increased, which I'm glad. But I think for the most part, we've seen in policing over the last few decades difficulty in recruiting. And so we have to be more intentional about what we're doing. When I got hired on about 32 years ago in Irving, Texas, there were about 350 people in the class that was taking the test with me. And they only picked a couple of us. And now we have much more difficulty. We have to be more intentional about who we reach out to, how we do recruiting. And that's probably the biggest change that I've seen in policing is that we can't just expect people to come to us and put in and go that way. We have to reach out to the community, all parts of the community, and show that policing is a viable career path.
I don't know, maybe I'm getting old in the tooth, but I think that is a bit of a shame in that sense. To your point, 30 years ago, even probably 20 years ago, people viewed this profession with the degree of respect and honor and privilege, frankly, to serve the community, to do something that truly is heroic and honorable. Which, you can't say about it, a lot of jobs, right? Something where you're actually saving lives. I'm glad to hear that, to your point, that hasn't changed. That's what you do. And people that take this job do. It's just, to your point, you have to more seek them out as opposed to them finding you. Do you, I guess, let me ask, do you still see the same degree of enthusiasm when people come in? It's just, there's less of the folks, but at least are they still as enthusiastic about serving the public?
Well, I think when you look at the different generations, the older generations always look at the younger ones and go, well, you just don't have as much buy-in or as much grit to do the job. I try not to take that attitude. I think that the people that are getting into policing now, they do have a desire, the same why as what I did when I came in. I wanted to leave a legacy. I wanted to make a difference. I want to be part of something bigger than myself. I think for the most part, people getting into policing now have the same desire. I think the sometimes the perception is a little different from us older generations. I look at it and go, come on, let's get going here. Show me some fire. Right. So it's a little different, but I really do think when I see what the younger police officers are out there doing and how they're doing it, I think the desire is there. I think that policing is safe when it comes to for the most part, the types of people getting into policing. I would say, I would add one more thing as far as some of the things that have changed in a good way is mental health and wellness. We're not perfect. We got a long way to go on that, but we're doing a lot better than we were 30 years ago. We here in Grand Island, I know we're taking an all of the above approach. So we have an app for all the officers. We have quarterly screening with a psychologist to talk to a psychologist. We have a peer support group. We have a chaplaincy program. So I make a really big push, and I talk about it all the time, here in Grand Island, because I think that in policing, we really need to focus on mental health, wellness, the compounding effects of PTSD in this career. Because we have a lot of people that are coming out of the military. We have a lot of people that are serving long careers in policing. And that's really a big issue. And hopefully it's changed for the better. But like I said, it's got a long way to go in that area.
Well, no, but I think that makes sense. I think, maybe there was, back in the day, a lot of youthful, naive enthusiasm. And I think not a lot of support, mental support. And I do think that, at least in my conversations with folks like yourselves, what you saw were a lot of unintended consequences of a lot of stress at work. And not dealing with that, creates issues and creates behaviors that are not appropriate. And I think, to your point, I think police chiefs like yourself have, aggressively tried to invest in their people so that the folks that do join have positive experiences and can have long careers without, and try to absorb those tough experiences in a way that doesn't affect their performance at work and keeps them still positive and supportive and remembering the ultimate mission in terms of serving their communities. So that makes perfect sense to me. I feel like, and maybe this is just a little bit of optimism, but I feel like the pendulum is swinging a bit back in favor of policing. Have you seen that over the last couple of years, or what
Yes, I absolutely have. So we had a tough time going through the George Floyd national incidents in 2019, COVID, obviously, a couple of years out through that. We were in a real slump in policing nationally, I think, as far as recruitment goes and the ability to fill the staffing levels. When I got here, for example, about 2 years ago, of our department, which will soon be 91 sworn, we were about 20 spots down. And that's a huge deficit to make up, because it's not only hard to recruit and retain, but it's also hard to get out of the hole that you've been put in, regardless of whether you did it or whether it just happened because of, economic, society, that kind of thing. I'm really happy to say that over the last 2 years, we've made a very focused effort, intentional effort on how we hire, who we hire. And we are, as of this coming January or April academy, we'll be at full staffing. And so that's a huge deficit to come out of. And we don't intend to get back in that hole because we're going to do some things organizationally and culturally from a leadership perspective that will allow us to maintain full staffing and grow going forward.
Well, let's talk about that. And that is, by the way, what I absolutely see when I go across the country is, typically agencies are minimum of 10, typically 20% down in terms of staffing. It creates stress because it's just a lot of extra overtime for folks who, because they still have to have people on the streets. You still have to have the patrol out there and serving the public. And so then those folks get burned out, and you have this kind of what I call a negative spiral effect. What have you done over the last couple of years? And you said that you've tried to put a few things in place. Walk through some of the changes that you made when you came in, or the things that you tried to do to affect that recruiting.
Well, internally, you have your internal things that you can do. You have your external things with regard to the community. And then, your official body, the council here in the city, for example. But internally, what we did was we're doing a reorganizational structuring. We're streamlining it as best we can to make the processes more efficient and balance out the police department, because we've grown over the last several years since this police department has grown. It's become unbalanced with regard to investigations, operations, and non-sworn components. So we're changing our organizational structure. We're increasing our leadership capacity and training and education. We are adding some middle management, lieutenants and sergeants, in order to deal with increased staffing capacity. And the big thing is that a department this size needs a few extra specialized sections. I'm not a big proponent of adding police officers just to add police officers to patrol. I'm a big proponent of adding police officers for specific missions. And so we're adding a traffic unit in the coming years. Hopefully the next year, a traffic unit, 4-person traffic unit to deal with enforcement, education, things like that, high accident areas. And we're also adding a violent crimes prolific offender unit of 4 people to specifically deal with the chronic offenders that we have in our community, that you have in any given community. And so allowing for this department to have some specialized sections and being big enough for organic movement, that's a big thing for retention in a police department, in my opinion, is that people want to spend 3 or 4 years in patrol and probably go somewhere. And so that allows for that. Externally, what we're doing is, you only got one chance to, in my opinion, to be the police chief and try to move the needle. And so I'm reaching out to the community in a lot of different ways. Some are non-traditional, some are very traditional. And I'm just a big proponent of getting out from behind the windshield and walking into places and talking to people. And I think that goes back to my time in Irving, where I spent most of my career there as a sergeant. And I just enjoyed the eyeball-to-eyeball interaction, talking to people, and that grittiness of local policing. And so we're doing a lot of things with the community engagement in order to have a force multiplier effect, and in order to, quite frankly, when I go in front of council, get what I'm asking for in terms of equipment, in terms of personnel. If the community likes what we're doing and they support it, then that's going to be resonated through the council.
That makes a lot of sense. By the way, for listeners, Grand Island is at 100 or almost 100 sworn officers. It's it falls into the kind of the what you would call a small to mid-sized number of agencies, and 95% of American U.S. police agencies fall under that number. We think about we see the crime shows, NYPD, or I think about our Chicago PD, and you think about those very large forces, but the vast majority of police chiefs manage or kind of operate in the environment that you do. And I think, it's great to hear, getting out, as you said, outside the windshield, and meeting the community. Cause I find, as I talk to folks, that seems to be the most important thing, is for police officers to just reconnect and let people know that they're the same, husbands and wives and spouses and brothers and sisters, right? They're just like the citizens that they serve. They're no different. They just happen to put the uniform on every day, and it's important to get that personal connection.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm doing shows here through our video and audio department that are humanizing the badge. I go out and I call it Business Beat, and I go out and I do these short segments with different businesses, local businesses in town. And it's just engagement with the businesses. In my opinion, and my personal feeling is I don't ever want to have to make a canned recruitment video. I want to be able to do something that engages the community, that's fun, that takes us outside of our wheelhouse to some degree, but it humanizes the badge, and it engages parts of our community that we might not talk to a lot. And that's really yielded a lot of results here in Grand Island, as far as recruitment, as far as people coming out and riding with the officers, touring the police station. So it's been very positive.
Well, and I think that's, to your point, it's back to the pendulum swinging back to where I think, there's enough time and distance past the George Floyd challenges, so to speak, that people get back to just a more normal interaction with police. And to your point, feeling more comfortable in those interactions, and hats off to you and other chiefs across the country to really make that an emphasis, which is get yourself and get your officers out there, so that the people, they can kind of reconnect, so to speak. One of the things that I've heard from police chiefs is that the nature of policing and the nature of the challenges are different. One example is one example of the challenges you face is that recruits, for example, come in having never been in fistfights, having never been in, because that's kind of gone away in America, so to speak. And so they're not used to physical altercations. And that's maybe a kind of a good thing in some ways, and maybe a bad thing in another way. They're very much more social media capable than, maybe our generation. As you think of when you bring new recruits in, What are some of the challenges in terms of teaching them the profession, given that they are a kind of a different generation?
Yeah, that's a good point. And a lot of the recruits that we have coming in haven't been in a scuffle, wrestling, haven't been punched, which is a good thing, I guess, society wise. But for policing, you have to kind of have that moment of truth when you decide out there on the streets, what you're doing and how you're doing it, and you're protecting the community. And so the challenges I think that we have when it comes to that kind of thing is really is just getting them to engage with the public. Because like you said, they're very tech savvy, and that's a great thing. They can whiz through a lot of applications. They can get on a computer and find out a lot of things that it'll take me probably half a day. But for the most part, I'm looking as a police chief here in Grand Island is for officers that are coachable and approachable, because we can teach them skills. But we need people here. I think in most businesses are really similar, where you want. It's very hard to teach somebody who's not coachable, who is not very approachable in policing. It's hard to teach them those skills. It's a lot easier to teach somebody how to shoot a gun or spray pepper spray, things like that. So we're looking at basically read a book, Hiring for Attitude, and I think it's a great book. And that's how we're focusing some of our hiring and our recruitment is on attitude, is on personality, and that's what we want here. So those young people that we're getting in are able to engage. If they're standing in line at a coffee shop and somebody walks up to them, they're able to have a conversation with them and not act like it's a police officer, citizen type of thing. It's you're having a human interaction. And so that's what we're looking at is as far as a recruitment dilemma with regard to the younger group coming in.
Yeah, that makes sense. In terms of just tactics, in terms of, as you think about training them to engage, at PepperBall, we talk a lot about de-escalation, and we talk about time and distance and giving officers a chance to, be able to assess the situation and not close in physical kind of space, so that they're in a situation where they feel threatened. Is that do you? I assume that's part of what you try to teach the new recruits. That's probably different than how you were trained when you came into the force.
Yeah, it's absolutely different than how I was trained. We were trained in my first agency with the lateral vascular neck restraint, not the arm bar, but the LVNR, the lateral vascular neck restraint. That was one of our go-to things, and that is pretty much prohibited unless it's a deadly force situation now. If you want to get into more of the nitty gritty, the tactics have changed and evolved over the last couple of decades. We're much less dynamic when it comes to search warrants and a lot of other things. Much more of a breach and hold type of thing, where we may use pepper balls, we may use gas, we may use our canine, but we're not going to go dynamic. So when I was on the SWAT team, now 18 years ago or so, 16, 17 years ago, we would go dynamic on any building, any vehicle that we were going to take down, and do it as quickly as possible. Now, for the most part, unless it's a hostage type situation, they're not going to go dynamic on that. They're going to breach, hold, call out, and they're not going to go into the structure for the most part. Now we have drones. I mean, drones are great, so you can fly a drone through the structure. I mean, it's all kinds of crazy stuff that they have now, which is an evolvement of tactics, and I think in a good direction. Everybody likes the way things used to be done if you did them that way, but it's evolving. I think it's safer. I think it's better. I think it's a better way to go. So those are some of the things that have changed tactics wise.
No, I think it's right. I mean, I think it's as opposed to the kind of, run in and, kind of run into the danger, it's to assess and to minimize the impact to the citizen, minimize the impact to the officer. And to your point, people that's a lot better outcome and a lot better long-term viability of that officer in terms of avoiding that adrenaline rush, but avoiding some of the negative implications that can come from it. I wanted to talk about school safety. That was your career is a bit unique in that sense, and that you had the chance to serve in that capacity in providing security for schools. This is such a sad topic in America. I think in 2023 there were 340 incidents where guns were involved in schools, K through 12 schools, and 273 folks that were injured or killed in the process. It's an incredible number. Tell me a little bit about what you did in that role and some of your thoughts about school safety and kind of things that we have to think about as a society.
Yeah, Columbine happened April 20th, 99. And since then, school shootings happened before that, but that was a watershed moment. And because of that, a lot of us changed our tactics where we weren't going to surround and wait for the SWAT team to show up if there's an active shooter situation in a structure. And so those changed our policing tactics. And I was involved as a SWAT member teaching the police officers on how we respond early in the 2000s. And that evolved later on to me leaving Irving, going to a school district as a police chief in 2016. When I was in Irving, I was over the school resource officer program for about 3 years. We did a lot of training with regard to active shooter. 2016 to 2020, I was in a school district as a police chief, and Texas school districts can have police departments. And so that was a different look at school policing. I'm a big proponent of the municipal police officer, school resource officer being in a school district. I'm not a huge fan of school policing, school districts having police, for example. But what we've seen change over the years is in evolving tactics. You would think that the police and fire would work closer together when it comes to that kind of thing. But now we're working on the policing will go in, neutralize an active shooter threat. The fire department will come in with paramedics and start treating the wounded and setting up triage and then evacuation. So a lot of things have changed with regard to that. I think COVID didn't help us do us any favors. I've got 4 girls, and I can say it definitely affected them in different ways because of lack of socialization. But luckily, they have a lot of resilience and a lot of support. A lot of kids that went through COVID, the ones that were already marginalized, they fell below the cracks. And so you're having, I think, a lot more issues, and we will have a lot more issues going forward when it comes to depression and aggression issues within school districts. And we're seeing that everywhere. I'm seeing that here in Grand Island when it comes to that. So that going forward, that's going to be an interesting subject to look at. It's going to be something that we're going to have to make some decisive choices and changes with when it comes to dealing with how we deal with disruptive behavior in schools. And it's been definitely a topic of mine for several years, especially since having been embedded in a school district as a police chief over a police department. There's just a lot of ways that can go. I will say that one of the better things that school districts mostly around the nation have done is set up threat assessment teams. And so when an objective threat comes in, they have a multidisciplinary group that deals with that threat, assesses it, and then starts proactive efforts to figure out how they can help that kid. That's one good thing that's happened. But again, we have a long way to go when it comes to school safety because it's going to be with us for a long time.
Well, it seems a bit like the conversation we had about officer mental health. The first step is to recognize that you have a lot of kids who are in distress, and that distress can find its ways into really dangerous situations, and at least be more aware. And so, probably, I think teachers are much more aware of those mental challenges, and not willing to and be more proactive in stepping in. And secondly, it's good to hear, and I have seen that across the country, preparedness be much more aggressive. People, the schools and the police agencies work together in that sense to be prepared and ready if unfortunately that horrible event happens. I assume you guys do a lot of work and preparation with the local schools in your community.
We do. We have school resource officers in our school district. We have 4 different schools systems in Grand Island, but the major one, Grand Island Public Schools, about 10,000 students. We have school resource officers in the middle schools and the high schools. And one more thing I would add to all of that is that I really think nationally we need to focus more on the elementary side of things. When you're looking at middle school and high school, you're looking at the manifestation of issues that probably happened and started in elementary school. Kids were growing up through elementary school. Maybe the parents got a divorce. Maybe they have a parent with an addiction. Maybe they've been bullied. Things like that are happening in elementary school, but they don't manifest until middle and high school. And we really need to back the clock up a little bit and start touching kids when it comes to issues that they're having and wellness on the elementary side, to hopefully mitigate some of those issues that are coming up in middle school and high school that we're seeing, but we don't realize really is starting in elementary school.
Well, this is one of the areas that I don't think the public really appreciates what police officers and chiefs do, is that I think, these resource officers are there to educate teachers about these issues. They're not mental health experts, but they are very sensitized to what they're in, and they I would imagine, is what I've seen, is they can spot issues, and having those officers there in a proactive way to kind of nudge folks to deal with issues that maybe they wouldn't otherwise. I mean, that is a really value added role for the police officer.
Yeah, it's huge, and some people would argue that having police officers in school is a bad thing. It's a pipeline to prison, as they like to say. But my experience over the last 20 years dealing specifically with school resource officers, is that the people that become school resource officers are great communicators. They care about kids. They care about the future. They're a great engagement tool for the school. Most of the school resource officers' offices that I have been in, is their door is like a revolving door, because you've got kids coming in wanting to have conversations, talk about issues, and that school resource officer is there. They're like a dad or a mom to so many students in school, and it's just a great resource. And I think going forward, hopefully we kind of get away from that idea that the police officers there just for the enforcement aspect, or for the protection aspect. Protection is job one. One of the best things to mitigate an active shooter possibility in a school campus is a uniformed police officer, armed police officer on campus. Aside from that, you're taking care of job one when it comes to campus security, but engagement with the kids and proactively heading off issues that might otherwise be criminal incidents or just emotion problems they're a great resource to have in schools.
Well, and it's the ultimate example of getting out behind the screen, as you'd said, and being engaged, and it's a wonderful way for, and I agree, it's a wonderful way for children to understand what role the police officer has. To your point, it's there is an enforcement part, but it's also it's there to as a support function, and as a that big brother or dad, that maybe that they don't have in their lives, that they can count on. And I'm sure that's a very positive reinforcement back to the police officer themselves, right? That's kind of why they took the job in the first place.
It is. And in addition to that, now here in Grand Island, we've added a therapy dog to one of the school resource officers at the high school. So he's the primary handler, but we also have secondary handlers. So that officer doesn't have to be away from the campus if he's going to another place. Other people can come in and get the therapy dog. But I'm honestly surprised over the last few months that we've had this dog, Boone is his name, what an engagement tool a therapy dog can be for the kids. It's just an icebreaker, walking down the hall with them. I mean, everybody's coming up and talking and petting the dog. And I mean, I say that dogs win the lottery, because, all that dog has to do is get loved on and eat food. It gets the best vet care, everything. So it's a great engagement tool. And I am really surprised myself of what a success that's been here in Grand Island in the school systems.
Well, it sounds like, as we wrap up the conversation, it sounds like, the some of the more simple things, it's back to the basics, right? It's about engagement, and it's about connections, and, and it's great that the dog is part of that equation, right? It's it all about personalizing the badge and realizing that it's just another dad or a mom behind that badge, with a dog, that they probably have one of those at their home. And, it's all makes things much more normal, I guess, is the best way of saying it.
Absolutely. We can definitely humanize the badge with there's not mutually exclusive. We can humanize the badge and protect our community and do exceptional at both of those, I think, going forward in 21st century.
Well, Chief Denny, thank you so much. I just have one last question for you. We at PepperBall love to make a donation in your name and the agency's name to the charity of your choice to thank you for your time. What is there an agency that we can reach out to on your behalf?
Absolutely, I appreciate it. My dad passed away about 2 months ago after battling Parkinson's disease for about 8 or 9 years. So I've been donating, and I'd appreciate a donation to the American Parkinson Disease Association.
Oh, fantastic! That is our privilege to be able to do that. Well, folks, you just spent along with me a really interesting half hour with Chief Denny. He is the chief of police at Grand Island, Nebraska. It's just a great example of the thousands of police chiefs across the United States that manage these small to mid-sized agencies, where the challenge for them is to reconnect the badge and reconnect the police officers back, reconnect on a personal basis back to their communities. And what you heard him talk about, which I took away, was this notion of getting out behind the windshield, getting out and connecting with people, and really helping them understand, that police officers are just, brothers, sisters, husbands, and wives. I really struck me the notion of how he talked about recruiting and that police officers or police chiefs have to be much more proactive in that context, and maybe in a good way, that they're out really, where they can be selecting folks that they think are good fits, as opposed to just kind of sitting back and seeing a whole bunch of people apply. And this notion of him, Chief Denny, talking about coachable and approachable, I thought made a lot of sense, particularly on the approachable part. And coachable in terms of, there's a lot more tactics now that policing use in terms of de-escalation. And so a lot more things that they have to think about. And so that you have someone that's coachable and yet approachable to public makes a whole bunch of sense. So my discussions with Chief Denny, it just reminds me of all the good that is going on in the United States, and all the good that these police chiefs bring to the table, and all the work that they try to do to keep us safe, and keep us safe in a way that allows us to feel kind of connected to them in a way that is so needed going forward. Finally, talking about school safety, it's great to hear Chief Denny's point of view, and I agree with the notion of putting resource officers in the schools, and even bringing dogs, therapy dogs, which I'm sure is an upside for the kids, but all making sense as a way to kind of reconnecting those police officers, as opposed to the faceless, soulless folks that sit behind the windshield. So I was really encouraged by today's discussions, and I hope you were too. Again, this is my name is Bob Plaschke, and I am the CEO of PepperBall, and appreciate PepperBall supporting this podcast, First Response. I am super grateful, as always, to be able to work and support emergency responders, and we'll see you next time.